There we go. Okay, so web apps are a great way to create a database application that's available to everyone. Since you don't have a VBA like a desktop, though, there are some limitations. What do you do when you're trying to take an application that was previously run on a desktop using something like Excel or Access with VBA and make it into a web app, but there are some advanced functions that need to be duplicated, and web apps doesn't have that function? Well, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. To find out what functions are available in Access web apps, the best way to do it is if you Google Access Web Apps SQL and Expressions Reference, it's going to take you to this link, and that will give you a comprehensive list of what is available. I'm going to list them out here in just a minute. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but I just want you to see what kind of things are available. And you'll see that there's a lot of the basic stuff, but some of the more advanced things just aren't there. So that's why we're talking about what we're talking about tonight. So our conversion functions, these are things that change the appearance or the data type or pick specific parts out of a variable. Okay, so casting changes the data type. Coalesce is something that you give it a list of values, and it tells you the first one that's not null. Okay, so you know, some of these are pretty self-explanatory. Some of them aren't. I encourage you, if you're going to be working with Access Web Apps, to take some time and go to that link. I'll show that link again at the end so that you can get it. Take some time and explore these, because there's things that can be done that you might not think of right off the bat. Database functions, I love these first two. User display name and user email address. That's coming directly from SharePoint from your login. So if you need to know who's logged in, that's the way to do it. And there's a lot of things that a lot of directions you can take based on who's logged in. So you can limit certain parts of your app to only certain users or whatever. Date and time functions, these are very similar to what's available in Access desktops. Very, very similar. Math functions, again, very similar. Maybe they're not all there, but the main ones are. Your program flow functions, your inline if is going to be the main one that you use. That's something that when I'm trying to program with macros, that's it's a very valuable thing. You don't have to have a bunch of if-then statements. You can just use that. Text functions, these again are very similar to what you find in Access Desktop. You can do a lot with strings. And of course your operators. Again, this is all standard stuff. Things that you would expect to see just about in any language you work with. So I want to start with a pretty straightforward example of what I'm talking about. The Excel mround function, it's pretty basic, and it returns a number rounded to the desired multiple. Okay, sounds pretty simple. Well, there's nothing in Access Web Apps that does that. So the examples I'm going to be using are from the project you've probably heard Andy talk about before that he and I worked on together, called the Waterfall Calc. And it's a government loan modification program to see if people qualify or not for certain modification procedures. So in this case here, what we want to do is we want to take the number that's in cell M54 and we want to round it to the nearest multiple of 1/8%. So the percent adds another item of interest here. So you can see in the spreadsheet what it had 4.38, and we came out at 4.375. So duplicating that is not all that difficult. It just takes some thinking. So here's our original calculation from Excel. And you'll notice for those of you that are brand new to web apps, a set local variable is what this means, set local var. And for our naming conventions here, we've got LVAR, WFR, and M55 would equal our cell number that we were working with. So you can kind of see the correlation here, the LVAR M54, and then how we're working with the percentages, we've converted it to decimal. And again, this is pretty simple. All we did was we rounded this calculation, M54 divided by the 1/8%, we rounded to 0, and then multiplied it back out. So we started with 0.0438 in LVAR M54. Our first calculation gave us 35.04, but then since we were rounding, we ended up with 35, and multiply it back out times the 0.1% again, and we get the 0.04375. So we matched our Excel spreadsheet, which is exactly what we were trying to do. So it's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple example, and was really not too hard to accomplish, but there was no built-in way to do it. So it just takes a little creative thinking. This is a little bit more in-depth example, the PV function. PV returns the present value of an investment. The present value is the total amount that a series of future payments is worth right now. For example, when you borrow money, the loan amount is the present value to the lender. Okay, I'm going to move the chat box out of my way here. If I can get my slide to switch, there we go. So in this example, we're rounding, and then we're using this PV function. Okay, and our target loan amount, this is in the spreadsheet, this is the amount that came out. Now you'll notice, oops, let me jump back here for a second. There's some interesting things going on here. First of all, the syntax is PV and then interest rate, number of payment periods, and payment. This is the calculation as it was in the spreadsheet, and here's what we have come up with in Access. And that looks like a mouthful. It was a mouthful. And I'll be honest with you, I am not a math whiz. I never have purported to be one. I went out on the internet and did some research and found someone that had calculated that very function out, and then I took that calculation that they had and turned it into what would work in Access web apps. So what you'll notice right off the bat here is that we're not doing things in the same order. This payment, the B48 is the payment. You'll notice it's at the end of the calculation, or in the function, and it's at the beginning of my calculation. It doesn't really matter what order we do things in, just as long as the result is what we want. We just want the correct result. You'll notice that we've used a couple of functions, or well, one, we've used the power function that was on that list that I gave you earlier. We use that as part of our solution. So sometimes it's going to take more than one thing to get us to where we want to be. I do not know why the negative sign was necessary in the original calculation. I didn't delve into it because I didn't need to delve into it. It wasn't necessary in my calculation. So that's another thing you'll notice that's different, is sometimes you have to take that into account. So if our syntax is the interest rate, number of payments, payment periods, and payment, this is what we've ended up with. And I'm not going to try to go through this whole thing, but basically, we're taking everything that we've got up here and putting it down into here into a calculation that works. Okay, and then we're wrapping it all in a round statement. We had to do it in such a way that we have basically done the same calculation twice and divided it by itself. But again, the main thing that we're looking for is not so much the detail of how each one of these is done. It's just the fact that I want to get you thinking about how to change things around a little bit to get what you need when you can't do it easily. So our third example here is, it's kind of a double thing. We've got the roundup and the payment function. In Excel, PMT, or payment, it calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. Roundup rounds to the desired decimal place while rounding away from 0. Again, seems pretty straightforward. In this example, again, here's our Excel spreadsheet, and we're just looking for a monthly payment. This is very similar to the PV function, just, it's doing a little bit different thing. So again, our syntax is very similar also to the PV function: interest rate, number of payments, and present value. So what we've come up here, again, since the two calculations or functions in Excel are similar, you'll notice that our calculation here in Access came out very similar. Again, we're doing things out of order. We're going to ignore that negative sign. But we get this calculation, and it gives us the number we want. But then we have to round up. That first calculation, the top one here, only takes into account what's happening with the payment. Then we have to round up. There is absolutely no way to do this in the web app's macro functions. So what you'll see is going on here is that we've taken, first we set LVAR E43 with the number, and then we're going to set it again. And within this second calculation, we're going to use it as the basis for what we're doing. Okay, now there's a lot going on here, so I'll try to walk through it slowly, just so you can kind of get an idea of what we're doing. So I'm going to break down the first part of this line. You'll notice that there's two inline ifs. All right, and if any of you aren't familiar with that, an inline if is basically an if statement that just takes one line to do. So we say if something is true or not true, whatever, if whatever, comma, then that's the true statement. So if it's true, then do that next thing. If it's not true, do the third thing. And we can bundle those together so that you get kind of nested inline if statements. But let's just look at this very first part. We've got E43. After we get done with that first calculation, E43 is equal to $789.381699. First thing we're going to do is cast that to a text. Cast changes one data type into another data type. Okay, so that's the first thing we do. Then we're going to move out one step here, and we're going to take the right-hand 4 digits. Okay, our numbers end up being in a 6-decimal precision. And to round up, we need to take a look at what those last 4 digits are doing. So the right is a string function, and since we've changed that number into a string, we can pick off the last 4 digits. Okay. Then we're going to cast it back to a number, except we're only casting that 1699. So now we've got 1,699 as our number that we're working with. And what we want to do is we want to see, is that number 1699, is it less than or equal to 4,999? Because that would be the break point if if we're having to round up, or if we're having to do nothing at all. So that's the first thing that we're checking for. Is that number less than or equal to that? So then we move to this next inline if, which is the true part of this first one. Okay, and then we do something very similar again, but we're changing it. We're checking to see if it's not equal to 0. Okay, if it is not equal to 0, we're going to add a penny. So that's the rounding up part. If not, we're just going to round it. And then the last part of the original inline if is that we're just going to round it. So in the end, we end up with $789.39 because we've rounded up, even though if we just rounded, that would be $789.38. Andy's asking, is there any limit to the number of characters used in a formula? I believe there is, Andy, because I think you and I ran into that. I can't remember exactly what it is. I don't know if it's 255 or if it's, I think it might be 255 actually. Do you know the answer to that? But yes, there is a limit to how many characters that you can have in a calculation or in a formula, because basically it's limited by what can go in this set local variable line. Eventually it's going to say, hey, there's no more room. And we'll get to that in just a minute. I'll show you how I had to actually break one formula into two in my last example. So our last example here is going to look at the Excel lookup function, which just returns a value from a column or an array. There are no arrays in Access Web Apps, just like these other ones I've been talking about. So if we look at this example here, you know, we're trying to pick out a value for this cell. And again, in Excel, an if statement is what we would call the inline if. All right, so they just call it an if in Excel because there's no other coding involved. So I'm just going to look at this at just one statement. Okay. So basically, it's taking a number and it's saying we've got a number and we need to match it to an array or a table. In this spreadsheet, this is the table that it's looking at. So basically, it wants to know, you know, I don't have J15 on here, but it's taking J15, adding 1, and saying find that number in that table and give me the amount. So it's going to look in column O and pull out the number in column P. So our syntax is just the lookup value and the lookup vector, which is the O through P. It's going to take the value out of column 1 and the vector out of column 2. And I'm simplifying some of this because there are other options on a lot of these functions in Excel, but we're just looking at certain things here today. So what to do when we need to do that? We were trying to avoid a whole slew of if-then statements, and in the table structure that we were kind of, let's say, forced into using, we couldn't even really have made it work with if-then statements. So what you'll see that I did here, and this is where I was talking about how I had to split into two lines. I'm creating a local variable called P array, and I did the first part of it, picking out these sections right here, the table FB.FBP1. That's a field in that table. So FBP1 is a field in table FB, and you'll notice we've got P1, P2, P3. There's 12 of them. Go figure. So I couldn't fit it all on one line, so I did the first part there, and then I said P array, and then I should probably explain what a concat adds strings together, just concatenates them. Okay. Now let me step back a second and say that this is probably only going to work for smaller arrays. okay? And what I've done here is I've delineated my columns with curly brackets because that gave me something that I could look for, a definite pattern that I could look for to find the number that I wanted. So to start off with, now that I've got that array, I need to find the beginning of the number that I want. So we're going to take a look at what we're doing here. We use the character index function, and that will give us the starting position of a string within another string. So what I'm doing is I'm using the concat to put together a curly bracket, the number that I want, plus that one that we talked about, and I'm going to format it into a 00 format. So if this number is 1, it's going to say 01, and then I'm going to put another curly bracket on there. All right, and what this entire statement is doing is it's going to give me the position of what I'm looking for. So in this case, if our table value for that J15 was 2, we're going to have 2 plus 1, which equals 3. So we've got a curly bracket, 03, curly bracket. That character index is going to pick this out right here. It's going to say that's where it's at. And this is the 23rd character. So we know it starts at 23, but we actually want to pick this 1403 out of there. So we'll add 4. That's where this plus 4 comes in to give us 27. And that's the very beginning of our number. Now we need to figure out where the end of it is. We do the exact same thing, except this time instead of adding 1 to our value, we add 2. So instead of looking for 3, we're looking for 4. All right, and that picks us out to the end of the number. Then we say, okay, the amount that we're looking for, and we're going to use the substring function. And substring just picks out a part of a string. Pretty self-explanatory. We're going to tell it the beginning. Well, excuse me, first of all, we're going to tell it what we're picking it out of. We're picking it out of the LVAR-P array, which is that big long one that we started with at the beginning. Where does it begin? We're using a little calculation to get exactly where it ends. And then on the outside here, we're casting it into a floating point number. So we pick out that 1403.00. Once we get done, we've got in LVAR amount, we've got the number we need. We can do whatever we want to with it. So if we were to go back and look at that original spreadsheet example, it had this little inline if statement, and that's what we're going to do here. But now we've got just that amount that we need to work with. So are there things that we can't do? These are a couple of things that I ran across that I wasn't able to figure out how to do. A VLOOKUP is similar to a lookup, but it's a little different. Just putting this presentation together, I ran across the choose function, which may actually fit the bill. And I'm not so certain that choose might have showed up later, because how Microsoft has decided to do Access Web Apps is they make updates, and when they update Access Web Services, whoever has it, they automatically get those updates. So if they add something or change something, it's automatic, and there it is. So I've noticed this choose function, which may have done something for the VLOOKUP. Same thing for the minimum and maximum type of things. I'm wondering if I might have been able to use one of the math functions for that. So the thing that you've got to be thinking about is not so much what can or can I do, is how can I get around this? And that's, if you're a programmer or a power user, a lot of what you're doing is just that. You're trying to think, how can I get around the problem that I'm having? So my intention tonight was mainly just to help you think outside of the box a little bit. If you run into something like these things that I ran into, the first step is to delve in and really understand how the original function is working. And then you can begin to piece together a solution. A lot of times we tend to look at web apps and concentrate on what's not available, but with a little bit of creativity, we can make it much more robust and powerful. I'm kind of finishing a little bit early here, but I want to go back to this slide here, which had the reference from the MSDN website that gives you all the functions and explains how they're used. One of the things that I really haven't checked on recently that was kind of a bummer at the beginning with web apps was they didn't have their help system finished exactly. I would run into pages that would say content goes here a lot. So I'm hoping that things are getting better, but these pages will give you a little bit about each function and what they do. So I guess what we can do is, if anybody, I've got the microphones on, so if anybody wants to ask a question, or you can just type it in the chat there also, and I'll try to answer. And if there's something that's more of the SharePoint stuff, I'm going to let Andy answer those. But I think we're to that point, maybe just a little bit early, but that's okay. And again, if you've got a topic for something that you'd like to hear about with concerning Access Web Apps, just send an email either to myself or Andy, and we can put that on the list and take a look at that in a future meeting.
One thing, this is Andy, I just want to chime in about is, because of the number of characters that, and I can't remember, it probably is 255 that we ran into, you know, we did need to shorten what we called like LVARs, and that's why in some cases you saw just the LVL instead of the LVAR and with the whole expression, you know, spelled out. We tried to shorten those as much as possible so that we remembered what the LVAR meant, but, you know, but shortening it so that we could fit as much as we could in there.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I was going to mention that, and actually, I think that was actually the reason we did that was another limit, which was the total macro size limit. I think is where that came from. Although it would have been the same thing for the lines, but I think the total. And maybe you remember, because I think you were the one that figured it out, it was somewhere just a little over 2,000 characters, actual characters in the XML, because all these macros are stored as XML files in SharePoint. And for some reason, it just had its little limit.
Yeah, let me see if, while other people are asking questions, I'll see if I can find the number of characters in the XML of the macro for you.
Sure. And I just want to thank everybody for checking in. Also, I know some of you are well versed in Access, and some of you are probably brand new. So hopefully, everybody was able to take at least something out of the talk. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate that. Andy and I worked well together on this, and this was kind of my end, and several instances was that was kind of my job was to figure some of these out. So it was good to be part of a team to do those types of things.
Tom, while people are asking questions, why don't you talk a little bit about how you approach an Access web app versus approaching something that you can, that's a desktop database?
Well, again, I'm probably guilty of what I said there towards the end, was that I think a lot of times you look at the limitations, and that's probably my first thought is, okay, can I get this done? But then, really, isn't that true with any project that we're doing? We're always looking at, is this the best vehicle for what I need to get done? So if you've got different programming languages or different software packages available to you, you're always going to pick the best one. And I think that's kind of the main thing that I'm approaching when I look at something is, okay, does it need to be on the web? And what are the functionalities that need to be there? Who's going to be using it? And these are really all the same things that you're asking anyway if you're developing a system. So if some of you are brand new, maybe you haven't had experience in doing those types of things, but that's pretty much the process when you're programming or setting about to build a system. Is you're looking at what's it got to do, who's going to use it, and where's it got to be used, among other things. But let me just read what Judy said. So a form needs 2 child link fields for a subform, only working with one or the other, but not both. So I guess what I would look at, and I haven't done that, I would look at, can you build a query that would put those 2 together and then base your subform on the query? I guess that would be off the top of my head, that would be the very first thing I would start thinking about. Because you can base your forms, they don't have to be based off of a table, they can be based off of a query for their record source.
It actually is a query. No, I take it back, I redid that. I've done it so many different ways.
I hear you.
I've done a few workarounds. I didn't like the query one. I was getting some duplicates for that particular way I did it, but I will try that some more. Another thing I tried is to create 2 new fields, the 2 fields that I need from the parent, and then to define them by referencing the parent form.fieldName. Mm-hmm. And it works on pop-ups, but I haven't got it to work using a subform referencing the parent. I have a pop-up and I say, in brackets, the form name and the field name, field name, and that worked. But in this subform, it just ignores me. It says #ref.
Yeah, that may be a limitation. Again, I haven't tried that, so I can't say for certain. But that may be a limitation. And I know that those, even working with queries sometimes, it's tricky on getting the right syntax to make it work the way it needs to work. Because we did run into some of those also.
Yeah. Basically, I just want that subform filtered down by what's selected in the parent. And,
right.
And so I'll use a macro to do that, but I need the field names or the field values in the subform to do that, I think.
Well, could you put you'd have your parent data, could you click a button that would run a macro, and that you could send the fields that you needed and use that to search out the record that you're looking for?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about doing it from the parent side. Yeah.
And Andy says, maybe, yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was getting at. Pass a temp variable over to the pop-up.
Yeah.
Well, a similar thing, yeah. Because you've got your events that you can work with too, but of course, again, you said you've got it to work with a pop-up. You're trying to get it to work with a subform. but it seems like maybe you could change the record source of the subform after you go out and get the correct record.
Yeah, yeah.
So that may be the direction you would have to go.
Yeah, I think that's it.
What does your web app do?
It's a check-in app, and it's actually used for 3 different departments at the same company. And they've got fabulous software that almost does everything they need it to do. So it just pulls in the residents, and it so this check-in app, which Kevin Bell helped me start actually at the POG meeting.
Great.
So it checks them in, and then it sends the attendance list back to the software.
Great.
We're almost there.
Well,
basically it functions, but it's not as user-friendly as it needs to be yet.
Okay. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear what types of things people are doing, what kind of projects they're working on.
Yeah, they're walking around campus checking people in, and even off campus, and so it's nice that it's web app.
Andy just posted also. He wanted to talk about one of the things that we had to do for our waterfall app. When it came right down to it, since this was a financial calculator, we had to be very careful about who could see what. And using our login process, it worked pretty good. But every now and again, if you would have maybe a momentary disconnection over the internet to your server, you'd get an error, and then it would pop up and show the person everybody's records, which is not acceptable in a financial situation. So what we ended up doing to get around that, and this is ugly, but we created a different entry form for each login, and we had a form that starts, and then you log in, and it only shows you the form that queries your records. So there's no way it can show you everybody's records. It's ugly in the fact that if we make a change, we need to make a change to everybody's form. So that's not a good way to program, but it was a necessary thing for the situation we were in, and it did work. So that was, I think that's what Andy was looking at for me to talk about there. Again, not the best way to do things, not the way we wanted to do things, but it did get the job done. And again, I know people are dropping off. I just want to thank everybody for logging in and listening tonight. We're hoping that the group can continue to grow, and just if you know people that are power users or programmers or whatever, have them check in next month, and we can definitely hopefully give them some good information, and we would love to have them as part of the group. So to talk, and the people are leaving. Maybe they're baseball fans and they want to watch the World Series. I'm not sure. It's 8 o'clock in Michigan anyway, but.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the lowest rated World Series of all time.
Well, I was just thinking as I said that, and I hadn't decided yet whether I was even going to watch any of it. So
yeah. Yeah, one of the things as you were talking, Tom, I was thinking what might be kind of cool is to start creating some kind of a library of workarounds, or ways that we took Excel functionality and put it into Access, just so that, if we ever have to reference it, it might be good for the group too.
Right.
To
Right.
have
Well,
those kind of things.
right, because it would be a great time saver, if people run into the same type of situation. Because I know we went many times around the same circle. It seemed like trying to figure some of these out.